Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. This is an amazing journal house. Wow. Like Aaron mentioned, I'm Daily French. I'm the president of the Hudson Area Library Board of Trustees. So I just want to welcome you all to the exhibit, Hudson and History of Whaling and Maritime Commerce. So our library seeks to enrich the quality of life in the community through programming, resources, and services. And one of the ways we do that is through eHistory Room, which, if you're not familiar, is a really amazing physical collection of documents and books and other items and exhibits like this one that tell the story of the history of Hudson and Greeport and Stockport. So it's a really rare treasure for us to have in the library of our size. I'm very grateful for that. So before we get started, I just want to say some thank yous. Thank you to all of the donors here in the room tonight who have given generous donations to help keep this programming going. Thank you to Brenda Schufelt, who is our amazing history coordinator. And also all the volunteers who are really passionate about making local history accessible to the public, including Elaine Eichelberger, who's the lead researcher for this exhibit.
Thank you, everyone. And yes, I'll pass it over to Brenda and Elaine.
Okay, great. So just a bit of business first. Sorry. So unbelievably, this Sunday at 2 p.m., we have a fantastic program I'm just going to let you know about. I can't believe both things are happening the same week. If This Old House Could Talk is we're co-hosting with the African American Archives of Columbia County. It's about the Van Hosen House. It's with the historian Fergus Bordewich and the president of the Van Hosen Foundation, Ed Klingler. And they are really doing a lot of research to try to find out if this house had to do with the Underground Railroad. So it's exciting. 2 p.m. on Sunday. And that's an in-person only program. Welcome to Hudson, A History of Whaling and Maritime Commerce. First of all, this exhibit would not have happened if it weren't for this gentleman right here. He approached us about 2 years ago and said, I've been researching whaling in Hudson for several years, and I have all of this information. He had really big binders, like binders at way. And did a tremendous amount of research, and it's his passion and his hours and hours of tireless work. And then he thought he was done and would pass it to us, and we were like, no, can you research women in whaling? Can you research black mariners? So then he had to do even more work. We're also very grateful for and proud of our partnership with the Hendrick Hudson Chapter of the National Daughters of the American Revolution, and particularly their regent, Virginia Martin, and the Columbia County Historical Society and their researcher, Catherine Hilliard, and curator Christy King. We approached them about doing a free site exhibition, and they said yes. And they have been wonderful partners. We've traveled together, we've researched together, we've griped together, and it's a heavy lift for a local nonprofit organization, and I'm very grateful to them that they were willing to take it up. There are so many other people to thank. There's 2 thank you panels there, and I hope you take some time to read them. I know there's a lot to read, and you'll probably want to come back, considering how many people are here today. It would be hard to just digest everything that we have here, but it includes the board of the library, the friends of the library, our staff, our wonderful staff, our volunteers, and very much our History Room committee. Alan Kuhn designs our logo, which is right there, and the puppets are here. So he did a lot of work as a volunteer, and Jane Sinclair helped us mount the exhibition, so we had a lot of help. We locals take pride in the fact that Hudson was a whaling town, and visitors are fascinated by it. From the urban renewal era campaign Spout to hotels named the Wick and the Hudson Whaler, we never leave this story past behind. There's a lot of bore about whales being dragged up the river and dragged up Warren Street. That's why it's so wide, right? For process. As usual, the facts are much more interesting. In our research, we found logbooks, journals, letters, and news articles detailing, for example, the suffering of being marooned on an island, being betrayed when you tried to rescue someone. Thanks a lot. Descriptions of being in a whaleboat that a sperm whale is attempting to stove. A man trying to make his fortune and bring pride to his family while on the open seas with an abusive captain. And, sorry, oh my God. A woman who sailed with her husband, and bore a child while on board. And you can visit her at the Hudson Cemetery with, like, she said. She lived after that, just saying. Black mariners who sailed out of Hudson to the world. Letters between Thomas Jenkins, our illustrious founder, and Thomas Jefferson after they breakfasted in Hudson with James Madison. And we're thinking they breakfast probably at Le Perche because because it's French. Jefferson was a huge francophile. These items of history and culture have a value for our community, and preserving, safeguarding, and making accessible this shared history is the History Room's mission. In the past year and a half, we have gathered items from institutions as diverse as New York Public Library, New York Historical Society, National Archives, Nantucket Historical Association, New Bedford Whaling Museum, Syracuse University, and many more, all of which held pieces of our local history. We obtained digital facsimiles that were once scattered to the wind, thanks in large part to the donors of the GoFundMe campaign we held. And they are back in their home port, including 12 logbooks on whaling and sealing voyages that began at the port of Hudson. After this opening, our focus in the History Room will be organizing these digital facsimiles into a whaling and maritime collection specific to Hudson. If you check the box on the sign-in sheet in the hallway, we can send you an email when this collection is ready, but we just managed to get the exhibit up. So we want the history of Hudson to be available directly to the people of Hudson. Oh, no, not yet. Sorry. So this is Elaine Eichelberger, and I lost the piece of paper that isn't in the document because I didn't want her to see it. She was talking about her. She has been a volunteer in our history room for 2 years, and she has lent energy and skill and knowledge and humor. And she also, I'm not afraid of many people, but when she gets me back on focus, it's because I'm a little bit frightened of her. She's been wonderful. We've traveled together to Nantucket and Cold Spring Harbor, and where else? In New Bedford, we both went to. So it's been a great journey in the history room, and I'm very grateful for her work.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let me just tell you a little bit about the exhibit, whether you see it tonight or if you come back later. It begins on the wall to the right of the fireplace here with the introduction, and it continues clockwise around the room. In the corner behind the door, over there in the front corner behind the door, the story begins with the indigenous people, followed by the Dutch, who lived and worked on the land and river, hunting and trading for their sustenance. You will see that our modern infrastructure began with the footpaths of the Mohicans, which later became the wagonways of the Dutch, then the toll turnpikes of the proprietors' era, and finally the roads we use today, including a hotly contested trunk route. Next, we move to the birth of Hudson, which is on the wall I'm looking directly at here. And our founder, Thomas Jenkins. Jenkins was a Nantucketer who had moved to Providence, Rhode Island. This Jenkins was not a whaler, but a merchant who ran several businesses, including trade businesses to the Caribbean, London, and other European ports. He chose to purchase land here because he saw the possibilities of the diversification of trade. On the alley wall here, right here to my right, we detail the very distinct two different eras of whaling in Hudson. Included here are spreadsheets Richard Baslow compiled of all the recorded whaling and packet voyages, which were voyages specifically for trading, that left from the port of Hudson. In the turret, there are the stories of 6 Hudson whaling voyages, told through memoirs, journals, letters, crew lists, custom documents, and logbooks. There were 56 whaling voyages out of Hudson, so these 6 are just representative. Also in this section is a spreadsheet of all the recorded Hudson mariners, again compiled by Richard. The exhibit concludes with a section on Hudson after whaling, with the gossips of Rivertown Coast on Hudson's industrial waterfront, which is very interesting. Information about Black mariners and women in whaling. And finally, a panel on this wall over here on whale conservation and what we in Hudson owe to this majestic animal. Hopefully, this exhibit will broaden your understanding about who we are as a city. Now, perhaps, when you walk the streets of Hudson, whether you are at a waterfront Wednesday or waiting for a train at the station or sitting at Kitty's or shopping at the antique warehouse, you can get a sense of what the founders of our city experienced and why and how they chose to create the city that many of us call home. I know it looks very different today, but there are really so many things that still connect us to this maritime past. We have 2 tables of merchandise with items that are for sale tonight, including the reprint of Margaret Schramm's Hudson and Merchant Whalers, and a special boohee tea that Kim Bach of Verdigris created in honor of this exhibit. There are also ornaments and stickers and mugs with our beloved Spout logo, so be sure to take a look. And finally, you are here tonight because you support our public library. The scope of this project was the largest that we have ever undertaken, and needless to say, it has depleted our coffers. So please consider donating. You can click on our donate QR code poster or use the donation box in the lobby, donate online, or mail a check to the library with History Room written in the memo. We are so grateful that you came tonight.
So we're going to have the premiere of the film, but there's a lot of people in the hallway. There is room in the front if anybody would like to sit on the floor. There are people already sitting on the floor, just saying, okay? And if you don't mind, if you're aware of your height, if you know you're tall, go against the wall. That's a poem, right? But please come in. If you know you're a little less, then you can come in and find your place here and stand between people. Yes. How long is the film is almost 17 minutes, and then we have a short panel discussion. Okay, so now for the premiere of our short film, Whaling in Hudson, What? By Carl Frederick Mattson of 542 Films. For those of you who've seen his work, you know his excellence as a filmmaker. To me, he's at once lyrical and down to earth, and we are very proud to have worked with him on this film and proud of this film, which was Gary Shepard's idea. And it will be up on YouTube in the next few days.
Who's Carl?
Yes. Oh, yes.
He's all right. I guess it's my jury. So I'm Carl. I'm the filmmaker behind I'm the filmmaker behind Whaling in Hudson. What? This short documentary explores Hudson's surprisingly rich maritime history as a whaling for.
Just bring it across to you.
A concept that raises eyebrows given the history's location, given the city's history and its location so far up the Hudson River. First, I'd like to thank Gary Sheffer and Brenda Schubelt for approaching me about this idea. And thank you for the Hudson Area Library and its History Room for trusting me to bring these stories to life, including this remarkable exhibition. I hope you enjoy this film, and I hope it leaves you curious, inspired, and even eager to recover more of Hudson's history for yourself. So, without further ado.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to do a quick panel here with some of our researchers. As the titles play, I'll just tell you that my idea for this movie occurred when I was at my daughter's wedding, and the out-of-town guests were talking behind me, and they were speaking to each other, and they said, "What is the deal with all the whales in Hudson? I see them everywhere on the street signs, on the sidewalks, on cars, and it's not possible that there were whales in the Hudson River." Githy Whitbeck, Carl Whitbeck, confirms that. So, Carl, that was fantastic. Thank you. You really fulfilled what... My only regret is I wasn't in it more. All right, so you met two of the three panelists in the movie, Virginia and Richard, and Catherine Hilliard from the Columbia County Historical Society is our third panelist. This is going to sort of be like a speed panel because we want you to see the exhibit tonight. And so these folks will be around afterward to ask questions as well. So I'm going to start with Richard. So history's been a part of your life, your entire life. You came to us in 2023 and said you want to help curate a exhibit on whaling in Hudson. Why'd you do that?
Well, thank you, Gary, for that question, and good evening and welcome. Because Hudson has lost so much of its whaling records, for far too long, young men from Hudson and quiet communities throughout the Hudson Valley who sailed on his whaling voyages, both men, white and of color, along with the women who stayed home and supported them, all remain largely unknown. To many of the institutions that have been mentioned earlier, all of them have been caretakers of parts of Hudson's whaling history. But tonight, you get to know some of those names and you get to read some of their words. To be clear, these whale ships could never have sailed without their sailors. The idea to research this exhibit started in 2017 when I saw an article in the Poughkeepsie Journal from November of 1960, and the gist of the story was whaling records few in an industry once important to the area. And I wonder, could the internet and today's technology help find some of this lost history? And besides, who doesn't enjoy a good mystery? But you know, it's a bad news, good news story. The bad news is most of Hudson's whaling records still remain lost. And with that loss, many opportunities for research. The good news, as this exhibit will show, is that we've had many successes over the 5 years. This evening, you'll get to know some of these men. In their words, they speak directly to us, as they did to their families so long ago. Through their letters, we learn of their experiences, joys, and hardships on these whaling voyages. A few years ago, I would be hard-pressed to tell you the name of one sailor on a Hudson whaling vessel. Today, we have a list of close to 1,300 men. Over 100 are mariners of color. Another 120 are men from Hudson-related voyages. And a remainder are from men who call the Hudson Valley their home, yet traveled as far away as Fall River, Massachusetts, New London, Connecticut, New Bedford, and even Nantucket, to take advantage of all of the opportunities that the maritime trades provided, whaling in specific. So tonight, if you're curious, if you could be descended from one of these 19th century sailors, that list of 1,300 men might be a good place for you to start your research. For me, and most importantly, we started to build narratives and stories of these men and women, white and of color, that were essential to Hudson's whaling past and its economy. And hopefully, this information, once compiled, can be a starting point for future family and historical research. And I think that interests them.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, it does. Okay. All right. Virginia, we saw in the movie, you're discussing women in whaling. So these whaling trips were not short trips. They were 2-3 years at a time. And that left the women in Hudson as the head of the household. So what did they do and how did they survive while their husbands were gone for so long?
Well, Gary, we don't have a whole lot of information about the women. The histories tend to be written by the men. But, we do have clues from other whaling ports like New Bedford and Nantucket. And in some of the histories about early Hudson that I've read, there are mentions that women operated a lot of different businesses. They were bakers. They had lots of different shops. There was a Quaker woman who was a clerk at the Bank of Columbia, which was a very early bank in the city of Hudson. So you kind of have to wonder about it. It's something that I would really like our DAR chapter to look into because we're all about history and about the proprietors and women and whaling and why shouldn't we? We're a women's organizations. So I would like our chapter to look into that. I suspect that the women who came here and settled in Hudson, and they were from Nantucket essentially, and they were Quakers, I suspect that they came here, bringing many of the customs that they observed on Nantucket. On Nantucket, they were very closely knit amongst themselves. Why is that? Because so many of their menfolk were away for very long periods of time. Also, they were isolated. They were on an island 30 miles away from the continent, so they were on their own. So they had to become self-reliant, and they were Quakers. And Quaker women understood their rights and authorities a little differently than a lot of other women did. So they had a knack for business. They were interested in the world. They were educated, and they held positions of authority. So they came with all this. I think that's what they brought to Hudson. I'm guessing that when they got to Hudson, they maintained a very close-knit community, and I think they relied on each other. One of the things they did was de Crèvecoeur came in the 1780s maybe and visited Nantucket, and he remarked on the women, and he said, they visit each other incessantly. As a matter of fact, what he said was, the custom of incessant visiting has infected every woman, and even those whose husbands do not go abroad. So I'm thinking that kind of habit here. And what happened when they got here? Who were the women that were here? They were mostly Dutch, right? And the Dutch women had more authority and more autonomy and more aptitude, or that were more engaged in business than maybe other women, English women, were. So I'm thinking that that's what happened. I don't really know. I'd love to know. These are inferences that I make, and I'd like to know more.
And you introduced us, you and Richard, to Sarah Chapelle or Chapel.
I know.
One way or the other.
I call it chapel.
Yeah, Chapel.
He calls it
It looked like a really exciting trip to the cemetery, too. Why did she end up on a boat? Do you know her story?
Well, again, I have to make a lot of inferences here, but she was Sarah Pinkham Chapel, and the Pinkham family was an old family in Nantucket. They had deep roots in whaling. A lot of Pinkhams wound up at Hudson. There are a lot of Pinkhams buried in the Hudson City Cemetery now. Not only Sarah and her husband and their daughter, but so how did she marry? Well, okay, so she was born in 1825. In 1846, I think she marries a whaling captain from New London, Connecticut. How did they meet? Well, they probably met because a lot of these whaling ports, they talked to each other. There was a lot of travel between whaling ports. There was a lot going on. And he was in whaling. Her family had been in whaling. They met, they got married in 1846. He had been whaling before. They get married, and he goes off a whaling again, leaves her. And in 1851, he takes off again from New London, Connecticut, and she goes with him. And we don't really know why, but, you know, again, we can make some guesses. And one was maybe she didn't like being away for the first 5 years of her married life, or most of the first 5 years. Secondly, you know, maybe she just wanted to be with her husband. Maybe she felt that she had a responsibility to make a home for him on board. He was away for years and years, and maybe she felt that she should be there with him. If she just wanted to be there with him, maybe she wanted to keep an eye on him. You know, they were traveling to very exotic places, and most people hadn't gone to. You know, they were all over, you know, the coast of Europe and Africa and around Cape Horn and out into the Pacific and Tahiti and New Zealand and Australia and Hawaii, and that's where she had her daughter, their daughter Anne. So maybe she was just curious. You know, maybe she had wanderlust. And maybe she wanted to keep an eye on him because there have been stories about what happened when they landed at Swampy Islands. So I don't know. I'd like to know more.
Yeah.
There is at least one book about women who went sailing, petticoat whalers. And there is a book of whaling letters. I think Sarah Chappell is a footnote in Petticoat Whalers, but she doesn't really have a full entry. And I don't think she has anything in whaling letters.
Great, thank you, Janine. That's fantastic. So let's go to Catherine. So, the Historical Society's exhibit is going to feature an illustrated timeline from the 1600s to the present day, bringing to life the historical context of whaling. It highlights captivating whaling stories from the origins of Moby Dick, which we heard about, to gripping accounts of whaling ships at the port of Hudson. It also examines unique opportunities for black mariners, as we heard about in the film. Whaling in the mid-1800s has been referred to as a maritime underground railroad. How did it work?
Well, first of all, thank you, Gary. It's very exciting for us because the Historical Society is going to be 109 years old this year. And this is the first time in 109 years we're focusing on whaling, which is such an important part of what's developed our great county. So back to the Maritime Underground Railroad. Very different from the overland Underground Railroad. Much less organized, no specific places to go, not as much planning. During that time, the coast and maritime activity and merchant marine activity was really, really important. And in the South, a lot of the people working in on the wharfs and the ports, on the rivers, boatmen, etc., were black enslaved gentlemen, okay? And they had an informal network of information. So they would know in a port, for example, like Charleston, they would know if a ship who was owned by a person in the north was heading back north, if they would want to become a stowaway overnight, they would know that that opportunity was a good opportunity for them to stow away. So it was much more opportunistic, less planning, etc. But most of all, was much, much safer and much faster. For example, the Port of Boston, and all of its records, only had 2 enslaved gentlemen that were discovered and returned to their owners. Now, again, some of the data for the black whalers and the black freedom seekers, it's less available. Another aspect that they had, in addition to working together and having this informal communication network, there was something called Seamen's Protection Certificates. And they were issued, I think they started issuing them in the late 1700s. You could go to a notary and attest to the fact that you were a U.S. citizen and then you were a free person of color. You could then take that document to the customs house and for 25 cents get a Seamen's Protection Certificate that certified you were a U.S. citizen. It described you physically, gave your name, place of birth, etc. But because to actually generate the proof for that, you could take your colleague or friend with you, and they could simply attest that everything you were saying was free. So the Seamen's Protection Certificates were also called free papers. And Frederick Douglass, who was an enslaved worker in Baltimore, caulking ships, okay? He actually tried to escape twice and didn't have much success. And on the third occasion, he borrowed a Seamen's Protection Certificate or free papers from a friend of his. And after getting out of the Chesapeake Bay area and into Delaware, he got on a train. And the train conductor came to him and said, okay, so show me your proof of citizenship, etc., your papers. And he said, oh, I don't travel with those. They're too valuable. But here's my Seamen's Protection Certificate. And it had an eagle imprinted on the certificate. And the conductor said, fine. And off he went. So that's a little bit on the Maritime Underground Railroad.
So, is there a storytelling in whaling is a long tradition, of course, right? Is there any story about a ship that sailed out of Hudson that sticks out in your mind, Captain?
Well, there actually are many, but I had planned to talk to you about the Nanina. And I see right behind me on this wall here is a summary of the story of the Nanina, so I'll go very quickly. Nanina was a 232-ton, which was classified as medium-sized brig, built in Hudson, sailed out of Hudson. Its captain was Captain Valentine Barnard, who had captained other vessels out of Hudson. To fit the Nanina for its voyage to the Falkland Islands, they were in search of seal pelts and whale oil. A lot of the final fitting was done in New York City after leaving Hudson. While he was there getting the ship fitted, he became aware that there was an embargo and very likely war was coming with Britain, as in the form of the War of 1812. So he quickly got out of New York because he wanted to be certain the voyage happened and went over to Sandy Hook, New Jersey, finished the fitting out of the vessel, and off they went to the Falkland Islands. Lo and behold, on Eagle Island in the Falklands, which is one of mainly rock, those islands, they encountered a British shipwrecked seamen from the British ship Isabella. And so they rescued them. And they also mentioned that Britain and the United States had gone into war. But because all of a sudden there were many more men to feed, half of the crew and one of the mates went off to another island nearby to get more provisions. While they were there doing that, the British folks they had just rescued from the Isabella seized the Nanina, imprisoned the crew, and left the people who had gone for provisions there. So the crew that left with the Nanina ended up in as not criminals, but prisoners of war. Exactly. Thanks. Prisoners of war in Rio. And the others that were left on the island for provisions, they were there almost another 2 years before they were rescued. So you can see that we think about whaling and the dangers of the weather, the dangers of creatures, the dangers of becoming ill. Human beings were dangerous.
But you can read much more detail about the Nangino right behind.
Yeah, great story. Thank you very much, Pastor H. So, by the way, it sounds like good thing we won that war. You know, all right, last thing. By the way, my favorite thing back here is the America 2. And it's a letter from Gilbert Jenkins, part of the Jenkins family of Hudson. And there were two Gilbert Jenkins. His brother was named Gilbert Jenkins as well, too, but he passed away. Another son was born. They also named him Gilbert Jenkins. But the letter here, just read it. It's in script, but you can read it. And he writes a letter home saying, the captain is a smart man, but this first mate, I don't like him so much. I hope I get to flog him on the way home. That's my favorite letter back here. Okay, Richard, last question. You researched this for 5 years. Was there anything surprising about whaling in Hudson that you came across?
Well, you know, if we're talking about stories, probably one of the most compelling things that we were able to develop, of course, was the Saraville Pinkham Chapel story. The fact that we were able to develop that and look at it and finally say, wow, this is really neat to have this story develop and have it be a Hudson story was really surprising and unique. You know, less than half of 1% of the voyages that sailed during the 19th century actually had women on board those whaling ships. It's like 0.035%. So Sarah was really part of a very exclusive sorority that, in a lot of ways, redefined the role of what it was to be a woman, a wife, and a mother during that time period. So that would be one. Another one might be actually the discovery of the Thomas Jenkins letter book that is part of the DAR of Hudson. And that's interesting because you get a different look at Thomas Jenkins during those seminal years between 1782, while he's still conducting business in Providence, Rhode Island, and then a few years while he was transitioning to Claverack Landing and then Hudson, and then to 1785. So during that very short window of time period, you get to meet a lot of different Thomas Jenkins. And it's kind of like pulling the curtain back on someone who, you know, we often think about when you talk about the history of Hudson and how it developed. There's always this air of inevitability about it. You know, the proprietors came, they brought all of these resources, they brought prefab houses, and there's this sort of inevitability about it, like this had to work. And yet when you read some of these letters from Thomas Jenkins during those seminal years, you get to meet a number of them. You get to meet the Thomas Jenkins that's wondering if the peace is going to hold with Great Britain, almost naively thinking that trade is going to go back to the way it was before the American Revolution. And then you get to meet the Thomas Jenkins, who's I like to call him the cheerleader in chief, who's writing to people to come quicker to Hudson because we could use you here. He's writing to merchant houses in New York City, and he's telling them that, you know, just tell us what you need because we have all of these products that are here that we can ship to you. So tell us what you need, give us the price current, and we'll see what we can do. And then you get to meet the Thomas Jenkins who is severely in debt. The Thomas Jenkins who is scrambling to close on bad business deals, collect money that's owed to him. The Thomas Jenkins that's talking to merchant houses in New York and asking them to please be patient because he finds himself in debt and he never expected to be there. So, you know, when you read letters like that, it's almost like You wonder sometimes if Thomas Jenkins, through all of this inevitability, had sometimes maybe had second thoughts about if this grand experiment might actually was going to work. So I think those are some of the ones that stick out for me.
Thank you, Richard, Catherine, Virginia. Thank you all for coming. These folks will be here. Enjoy the exhibit.